Welcome back to the Rollup High Roller community. As always, nothing on the Rollup is to be construed as financial advice. We are just some educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this, and finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you, and let's jump in. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup. I remember after the Ethereum merge, proof of stake, everyone was like, such a good idea because proof of work doesn't scale unless you have tons of transaction fees. You have now a blossoming, Ordinals, the most undervalued NFTs in the market. They're going to the, okay, none of that today. We're going to have some fun. We're going to have some education. We're talking with Rich of CoreDAo today, one of the coolest and biggest communities in Bitcoin utility. Rich, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to chat with you guys here today.
Yeah, man, I think to start would be great to kind of understand like your core kind of thesis and kind of principles as to your journey through crypto and kind of how that's led you into working deeply with CoreDAO and some of your personal theses amongst the space and kind of how that's led you here.
Happy to give you the crypto rabbit hole story. So first got introduced to Bitcoin as part of this like directed reading thing during college. Had this professor, it was about computer security, and he told us about the Byzantine generals problem and this cool thing called Bitcoin. This is like 2011. I wish I went all in at that point. I did not. I was like, oh, there's money in the computer, kind of like the Zoolander thing, right? Like didn't fully get it. And then the 2013 cycle came around and I was like, oh, I get this. This is actually like this amazing freedom preserving technology for unstable governments, dynamic currencies, like all of that really came into vogue. And I was just sucked in at that point, really kind of true to the Bitcoin ethos. Started to get involved in the space, to trade altcoins, like really started to kind of go all the way in. Around 2016, 2015, somewhere in that range, I heard about Ethereum. And that really clicked, the original like digital oil versus digital gold piece. And that was where I said, hey, this is what I want to spend, the rest of my career on. And then by the 2017 cycle, I was, fully in, found my way to Coinbase. I was there for 3.5 years leading money movements engineering. That was a ton of fun, have amazing war stories, really enjoyed it when it was a much smaller company. And then as it scaled like crazy, I kind of phased out of that. I'm much more of like a 0 to 1 product builder, but met a lot of amazing people. And again, got to launch a bunch of assets and do a lot of cool stuff over there and move trillions of dollars too. So that was pretty cool. I don't know if I'll get the chance to do that again. Essentially in early 2022, I had heard about this project Core from a friend. And it was this team of engineers that were on this novel consensus mechanism. They'd been working on it for a little over 3 years at the time, and they needed someone to help shape the organization and to help kind of really spur the movement and help build the organization. And I said, hey, this sounds like a 0 to 1 thing again, get to work with this amazing team and just play, a small role where it's this global group of contributors. And that was really kind of, we were off to the races. We did this, large community building effort to really ensure that the holders were the users of the chain. And then there was a large like infrastructure building phase and launches throughout 2023. And now we're leaning in super heavy to our novel consensus mechanism, Satoshi Plus, and all the utility that we unlock for Bitcoin and Bitcoin holders. So super fired up and lots more to do. And I'm sure we'll double click on all sorts of that.
Yeah, there's a million different directions we could go. I want to like lean into the background, like your personal experience a little bit working at Coinbase, which obviously is a centralized institution, now working for like a decentralized DAO. What's the difference in your experience been?
Couldn't be any more different. And again, there's pros and cons. What's nice about like the centralized business is you've got clear reporting structures. There's a lot of playbooks that are in place. There's like these vast sums of knowledge that you can pull from. And there's a lot of like having been there, done that is super useful as you scale organizations. And that's some of like the secret sauce of Silicon Valley. People always talk about, like replicating Silicon Valley elsewhere. And that's impossible because there's so many people there that you can pull from that have some experience that you can bring over tweak a few things, but the playbook still works. And that's one of the reasons of really the magic underlying there, on top of like the entrepreneur innovative spirit, all that sort of thing. But it was very structured. Coinbase of itself was more of like a forward-leading company in terms of how it was thinking. It was remote first from very early on. The idea was all about convicted decision-making, high ownership, all that sort of thing. So still very different than like your Facebook or your Google, but still very much a centralized institution where you had reporting lines, the ability to, organize meetings at routine intervals, all that sort of thing. If you flash forward to the DAO is a decentralized organization. There's people from all over the world that bring a variety of different skill sets. And it really gives Core and other projects like it the ability to pull from the best and the brightest from wherever. And I'm a huge believer in remote work, and leaning into that hardcore, I think, is not only very true to the crypto ethos, but just like the forward-looking ethos. And then other kind of differences from that piece, it's amazing. You get 24-hour coverage, right? Like it's very easy to have people that are in the places where you're trying to be, grassrootsing all these different pieces. And that's really special. That's one of the things I love about crypto is there's 6 billion people in the world that crypto can really help on a day-to-day basis that are suffering from some sort of, either it's inability to access a banking system or unstable currencies, like you name the different problems that crypto solves. But being able to actually get boots on the ground in those areas is super duper important to help kind of spread that message and what this technology unlocks. But yeah, it's not without its trade-offs, right? Having no structure is difficult, and we're still, as an organization, still trying to figure out how to navigate those and learning from best practices. But it's also fun because you're on the frontier setting a lot of these best practices. But those are some of the most enjoyable phone calls that I have, is when I just try to go learn from people that have maybe been there a few years prior to us. So very different on like a day-to-day basis, but a ton of fun.
Like the Larry Bird of CoreDAO. See you're a big fan.
From Boston.
Yeah,
so yeah, always Larry Bird over Magic Johnson for anyone who asks.
Spicy takes. Yeah, I mean, just the entire realm of what work has shifted, which has been really interesting to see, especially for our kind of this upcoming generation of people that are involved in crypto. For us to hear your story, Rob and I kind of got in 2016, 2017 to even just be able to chat with people from 2011 it's an honor, and it's a rare breed these days, which is quite interesting. And I feel like that early stage interest and kind of early adopter kind of has also propelled some of your journey to kind of be focused on Bitcoin as it was the thing for the longest time. And I kind of brought up in the beginning how proof of work was is a model that has been pushed against in terms of its long-term security. But as I also said, and something that a lot of the OGs of Bitcoin now are realizing is like, well, if you just get some activity on the chain, then a lot of those concerns are basically like they're kind of rendered useless. So I'm curious, like, how excited you are with regards to like this Ordinals and BRC20s and what Core DAO is doing. Like is this is what you guys are building, as well as this kind of activity on Bitcoin, is this going to save Bitcoin in the long term? Like, what's your thought on like on this on all the activity, because it's quite new, right, in the past like 6 months? Just curious, like, what your thoughts are to all the activity.
So super excited, to put it bluntly, but I think it's good to just maybe take a step back and explain the problem. So one of the beautiful parts about Bitcoin is it has this unchangeable monetary policy where every 4 years the rewards get cut in half, and then eventually it has to sustain purely on transaction fees. But even a few cycles from now, there is doubt on whether or not the system itself is sustainable because of that very difficult ratchet, right? Like having your rewards cut in half every 4 years is something that you have to deal with, either by the Bitcoin price increasing or by transaction fees offsetting that. And what we've seen since the beginning of last year, when it really started, but about 6 months ago, you're right, is when it like kicked off really in earnest, was like inscription fever, Ordinals really coming into the spotlight, BRC20s. And I couldn't be any more excited to see Bitcoin back in vogue again. It's exciting to build on Bitcoin for the first time, really, since 2017. And really at that point, it was like probably one of the more divisive times in Bitcoin, which was the block size wars, right? And it's awesome to see this come back into light and to see all this Bitcoin development really taking off. Core is very excited about this as well, because with Bitcoin's very limited capacity and expensive fees, et cetera, go down those different things, you have the ability, or will shortly have the ability, to actually swap over things that you mint on Bitcoin and vice versa. And I think we're going to see BTC Fi and BRC Fi really kick off in the next 6 months. I think this is going to be the biggest story for crypto for at least the next year, but I think and beyond. Bitcoin has roughly like $1 trillion of trapped liquidity today that needs to get unlocked. You need an EVM-compatible chain to unlock this with the right scalability properties, et cetera. And Core is really hoping to do that by providing offerings from your full Bitcoin degen or soon to be Bitcoin degen all the way to your passive Bitcoin holder. And then Core also has a very special relationship with Bitcoin, where because of this monetary policy, long-term sustainability question is out there, Core rewards Bitcoin miners for helping to secure the Core network. It provides this exogenous block reward to Bitcoin miners, of which 1 out of every 2 Bitcoin miners who are just south of that is actually currently delegating to Core. And that helps smooth out those rewards over the 81-year emission cycle of Core. So there is this additional security budget expansion that Core helps give back to Bitcoin with, because a healthy, decentralized, secure Bitcoin helps secure and decentralize Core.
Andy and I bring up this question sometimes with all the new consensus mechanisms that are coming up on Ethereum. Like, we were kind of like framed the question of like, well, what settlement network is stronger than Ethereum? And the only answer is Bitcoin, because the cost of corruption is the only one that's higher than Ethereum. So let's talk about Satoshi Plus here, like the consensus mechanism of Core DAO. Does it, like, what is the interconnectivity with the consensus network of Bitcoin? Is it one-to-one? It, like, with cost of corruption, you mentioned like it has its own like validator set. Could you kind of like give us like the quick and dirty on Satoshi Plus?
For sure. So Satoshi Plus is the hybrid of delegated proof of stake and then also delegated proof of work. And on the delegated proof of stake side, you've got the core holders. The core holders delegate to validators in the network. On the other side, you have the Bitcoin hash delegates, which are largely the largest mining pools in Bitcoin, that as they produce blocks, they add a little bit of data to the OP return field. And by doing that, they get this trustless relay process that brings that data over to the core chain by an actor called relayer. And by getting that over, that is the other part of the algorithm for how these validators get elected. It looks at your relative hash relative to your relative stake. In early Q2, Bitcoin staking is going to go online as well, where you're going to be able as a Bitcoin holder to non-custodially stake your Bitcoin to add another variable to this equation to help Core further extend its security budget. And that, again, is not live yet. Will be coming here soon, but it'll be a way to make Bitcoin a yield-producing asset and a productive asset without ever having to leave the Bitcoin chain. And to think about the security properties, as of now, you can look at it as like DPoS is here, Satoshi Plus is in the middle, and then Bitcoin's over here to the side. Over time, there's this like several research streams into how to get closer and closer, but there are trade-offs with the different performance characteristics that the chain has.
I'm coming to this realization, and I want this to be an accurate understanding, but please poke holes in this analogy that I'll draw. Like, EigenLayer is now like pioneering restaking, where you have ETH in a validator, you can restake that and extend like that ETH to secure another network. Is that like a similar like mental model or like a similar design to what's happening here, where Bitcoin miners are now like kind of like restaking their Bitcoin in a sense? Like, they're now using that hashing power that they're using in a Bitcoin miner. They're now using that same hash power to secure a proof of stake network, almost like restaking with Bitcoin.
In some ways, yes. And this is a question I get fairly frequently. it's not technically restaking because there is no staking, on Bitcoin, but like synonymously, yes, it's that like you're reusing that same budget. We're applying it slightly differently though than like a Babylon, if you will, where the idea is that this is securing like the core blockchain itself versus like a world of other blockchains, right? Which is like kind of where that analogy slightly breaks down a little bit. What I would say is that there is no reason that Core can't start to do that in the future as well. Core and Satoshi Plus is very focused on like a multi-chain ecosystem, and we think we'll see more and more Satoshi Plus chains that come online that will bring that part of the vision to a reality. It's not only the primary focus, but yes. And the other piece, the part of the analogy that you mentioned is it's not only giving the Bitcoin holders the ability to like restake in this case, but also the miners, which is this nice additional property. But yes, like that is a good kind of like rough idea.
And I think what's important about this is that it's natively on the Bitcoin blockchain. It's not like there's no extra security assumptions from taking, your Bitcoin off of the chain. And so that is appealing to a lot of kind of those OG Bitcoiners who are like, well, the reason why I'm here and why I like this is because it's hard money in a sense, right? And so it's like that property of not needing to take that off. That's a very powerful tool for that community.
So as a former Bitcoin maxi way back in the day, yes, you're 100% right. I think the way to think about it is like people view, and I think this is like an inaccurate view of all ecosystems, but they look at all of the participants homogenously. And that's just not true. It's not true in Ethereum. It's not true in Core. It's not true in Bitcoin. You've got these very different actors that represent very different views, and that will never go away. Like, I think that's actually a real sign of health, right? Is to have like differing views. And having talked with many, many people, that are in the Bitcoin community for several years, there's a lot of folks that you're 100% right. Like they never want to get involved with anything that ever leaves the Bitcoin chain. And that's totally fine. There needs to be product offerings for those people. That's a totally valid viewpoint. Bitcoin is perfect digital gold, and making that digital gold yield bearing is really exciting. And I think that for a lot of folks, that's totally true. I also think we're seeing this emergent group of folks who want to soon lend out their ordinal and then take that money into like a levered BRC20 trade on a perp dex. That's coming soon as well, but those aren't the same people. And I don't think we should try to but wow. I think that's coming.
Sorry to interrupt. I just bamboozled by the degeneracy over here in the bull market. We're in here for like 6 months and we're flipping. Wow. And so then CoreDAO is a key part of this like kind of Ordinals BRC20 combination. Where does this all kind of tie in? So a lot of our listeners are very EVM focused. Let's say when we're trying to get involved with BRC20, with Ordinals, with CoreDAO, like how does CoreDAO fit? And then how does one kind of start to get involved?
So this is definitely forward looking. So like with that caveat, I think what you'll see is a lot of like the minting activity and that sort of thing will stick on Bitcoin, at least short term. But I think a lot of these pieces will start on Bitcoin and then start to move elsewhere. Some of that will come to Core. Some of it will come to other places. But I think a common pattern that we'll see not far from now is you'll mint an inscription or an ordinal, like something that has value and that sort of thing on Bitcoin. It will then get hash time locked over in like a trustless transaction over to Core, or again, like another ecosystem. And from there, it can either get wrapped or it can get traded on AMMs. And you'll have all this kind of opportunity. But I think having a lot of that minting process on Bitcoin, at least short term, is something that we'll see. But I do think it will move over into the EVM not far from now. There's actually several cool projects on Core now that are actually starting to build solutions for that world. But I think that's where you'll start to see is a lot of this activity will start on Bitcoin, whether it's Bitcoin itself or these mints, and then it will all come over and start to engage in BTC-Fi.
And then how are you guys thinking about like the transaction fees on Bitcoin? Is it like doesn't matter if they're a lot, it's not supposed to be a chain that you use a ton, or is it like a problem? And then similarly, how does and do the transaction fees on Bitcoin affect CoreDAO? And kind of how are you guys thinking about that as well?
So I think a problem is a tricky way to characterize it. I think it's by design in a lot of ways. And I think that's good. I think more and more of this activity, again, will start on Bitcoin, but will then move off to cheaper places to transact, except for maybe some mints and that sort of thing where you're looking for like ordinal theory that only exists in like UTXO chains. So I think some of that will stay forever, but I do think Bitcoin fees will continue to increase, and that will, a lot of the pieces that do not have to be on Bitcoin will move off. And I think that's where we see a lot of these like pure on Bitcoin solutions. Like in theory, they work really well, but then the fees make it unsustainable, and they'll have to move elsewhere. When it comes to like long-term fees and that sort of thing, the Bitcoin fees themselves do not actually impact the core fees. And that again is where it has its own unique consensus, but that is nice. Core can have cheap fees and you don't lose any of the value there. Core is also doing a bunch of research into local fee markets. And local fee markets, I think, are pretty hot in crypto right now, popularized by the folks at Solana, but now is kind of starting to look into EVM. Avalanche is doing some work there as well. But that's one of the biggest areas we think will unlock kind of the original vision of Bitcoin, which was Bitcoin as money. Bitcoin as gold is still a totally fine stopping point, don't get me wrong. But Bitcoin as money, kind of some of like the original more Bcash kind of thesis back in the day, has a lot of legs, but no one's really unlocked it yet. And that's another piece that Core hopes to really help bring to the market.
Yeah, I think the parallelized virtual machines is going to be, I mean, it's forcing the hand of those who don't like the EVM. The EVM doesn't have parallelization baked in, so it's a little bit problematic. It can't really compete with, the Solanas and the Sais and the, et ceteras of the world. But, the other argument is kind of like about the decentralization and things, but that's kind of a conversation for a different day. But I find that quite interesting that that's something that you guys are pushing on and are, trying to focus on as well, or at least thinking about. Another thing that I'm curious about is about the Core DAO ecosystem. So obviously the community is quite active and quite, accessible and vocal, and they're almost like a whole nother set of validators themselves, social validation, social capital. But within the actual Core DAO ecosystem itself, what are your plans for 2024? And perhaps you can even look back as to how it's grown and the current state and kind of what you have in mind.
For sure. So 2023 was really about getting the initial ecosystem in place and getting the infra providers, like all the different pieces that need to be in place for a healthy functioning ecosystem. And there's a reason that took, a year. One, it's hard to go find the best partners to go work with, but two, Core was closer towards a fair launch. And that was really important, where we have this deep tie into Bitcoin to have the early users be the owners of the chain, participating in governance and also helping to secure the network. So that was very much by design. But with that, you didn't have as much of the kind of like classic VC style news stories and that sort of thing that kind of brings in a lot of those like early infra providers. You have to actually go track them to your chain with the usage metrics and all that other sort of thing. And now we're really looking to scale, and the network and the ecosystem is really looking to scale into 2024. And there's going to be somewhere around between 50 and 75 dApps that will launch here in the next 2 months, which we're really excited about as like a ecosystem, if you will. And we think that's only going to pick up. This idea of unlocking Bitcoin utility is really appealing because there's so much potential liquidity there. And the conversation that I think should be had is Bitcoin is currently like 4 times bigger than Ethereum or something roughly in that nature. If Bitcoin really leads this next cycle, does that expand? And then also just in raw numbers, if it's $1 trillion asset today, roughly, does that get to 3-4 trillion? If some percentage of that comes into DeFi, there's no reason that shouldn't be the biggest asset by TVL. And I think we're kind of going to start to see on Core and other chains this race to become like the Bitcoin powered X, because being the biggest borrow lend for Bitcoin is going to be huge, right? And I think we just haven't really seen this. But take borrow lend and go like 8 times more degen, because I think that's where this cycle is going to go. But that's been a real big appeal. And then the final piece is just the core audience is really large. So for these projects that want to come launch, you actually have real users that can go use your network. And that's been a real challenge for many builders in the space across every ecosystem, right? It's like there's only so many users in crypto. There's only so much airdrop farming and shuffling from like X to Y. And my personal bet is that this is the cycle where we do cross over as like an entire industry into like more mainstream adoption, and Core is here to help.
Very cool. I'm curious on your thoughts about ordinals, like, yeah, I mean, or even that first, and also like, what's the NFT situation like on CoreDAO?
So I'll take that in reverse order. The NFT situation on CoreDAO right now is pretty nascent. However, that ties into the first question around ordinals. Once the HTLC comes online, which should be in early Q2, we think that's really going to start to spin up beyond just like the native core NFTs that are already in place. We think there is desire to get more utility out of these things. When I think about ordinals, what's my personal opinion? Super cool. Why do I think it's super cool? You have provable scarcity with ordinal theory, right? Like that to me is more interesting on a fundamental level than like a X out of 10,000 mint and that sort of thing. Obviously, that's like kind of losing some steam on Ethereum and that sort of thing. But I think having the provable scarcity there via the UTXOs is quite interesting. I also think we're seeing some like kind of more novel things where people are going to like the first transaction that Satoshi sent to Hal Finney or whatever and trying to get UTXOs from that and like turning them into NFTs. So I think there's some really cool stuff that's kind of emerging there because you get to use the UTXOs, which historically are very limiting, but are kind of a new design space in NFT land.
So it's funny because we have provable scarcity with smart contracts. But the issue with the NFT landscape is like this idea where your JPEG is hosted on like AWS. So you own this token on chain, but if they don't pay their AWS bill, then well, you lose your image. Which is kind of a weird one, but we won't dive too deep. I just strongly feel that the level of NFT community within a ecosystem is directly correlated to the amount of actual great builders, community usage, attention, and all of it. And it's such a weird correlation, but I've seen it time and time again where it just continuously happens. As we kind of come to a close here, I just would like to, just really get our hands dirty as to how our community can get involved on Core. What are some of the great opportunities there for yield? How can we, if we have funds on rollups or if we have funds on centralized exchanges or Bitcoin, how can we access CoreDAO, and take advantage of kind of everything that's going on there?
Yeah, so there's several different ways to get involved. So one is Core is supported by many different centralized exchanges out there that offer on and off ramps into the ecosystem. Core also has a bridge that was done in concert with Layer 0, so it's very easy to go back and forth from Polygon, Arbitrum, ETH mainnet, like pretty much any EVM chain. So it's very easy to get on and off. When you get into the ecosystem, there's various providers that you can do stuff with, like SushiSwap and that sort of thing. And the idea as of right now is like Core is pretty early. A lot of this stuff is going to spin up in February and March of this year. And it's good to be early to ecosystems is probably the wink that I can say on that one. But there's a lot of cool stuff that's coming in the not distant future, but there's also lots of great projects to play around with now. We've got several of these launches in Q1 and Q2 with the hash time lock to bring over all these things from Bitcoin, our trustless bridging solution from Bitcoin, and then also the Bitcoin staking that we think will bring a lot of potential interested builders in the ecosystem to help unlock, all that trap Bitcoin, the utility. So a bunch of stuff to do now, ton of stuff to do a month or two from now.
So we're still early.
It's good to be early in crypto.
Coming from an OG, would not fade. Would not fade.
Rich, last question. Are you Satoshi?
I wish. Not for the monetary reason, which this is gonna sound like such a purist answer though. But it would be for just like the good that Satoshi, this group of people, like brought to the world. I think when we look back on this century and the greatest invention of this century, it's hard to like fade, to use your term, Andy, like the next 75 years. but I think it's going to be very hard pressed to find something that does as much good for the world as Bitcoin did. And like, you can go into AI and like all these other amazing things or whatever, which are like amazing technical marvels and that sort of thing. But I think hard, provably scarce money is probably going to be the invention of the century.
I mean, it's like, yeah, it's a 0 to 1. It's like a 0 to 10. It's just, it's something that you have innovators, and then you have people who think of completely changing something that is so entrenched, and it's just, yeah, it's magnificent. So I guess if you're not Satoshi, then you're either Craig or Roger, and maybe you're friends with them. I remember the good old BCH airdrop back in the day, the OG airdrop on Kraken. And yeah, I mean, to dive deeper into the Bitcoin topics, I think we'll save some of the bigger blocks in the decentralization conversation for another time. I really appreciate your time, Rich, and coming on and kind of sharing a lot of insights, and really excited to see where we can go with CoreDAO. And guys, we are still early. It is good to be early in crypto. Thank you, Rich.
Thanks for having me.